Japanese pilots couldn't believe their eyes when Saburo Sokai, one of their greatest aces, was blasted out of the sky at point-blank range by U.S. gunfire over Guadalcanal. A lowly .30 caliber bullet tore through his cockpit and pierced his head, yet just as he was almost plunged into the sea, he clung to life, flying his crippled hundreds of miles back to base. This is the shocking story of Saburo Sokai. Sokai's rising prestige in the Imperial Navy. Saburo Sokai didn't begin life as a warrior of the skies, but he started out on a humble farm in Saga Prefecture, Japan, born into a family with samurai roots but little money. When his father died and his family struggled, the young Sokai looked for a path that could lift him beyond rural poverty. At just 16 years old, he joined the Imperial Japanese Navy and entered a world of strict discipline and demanding training. Sokai first served aboard battleships, learning the basics of naval life, rising slowly through the ranks, and proving himself dependable and tough. But his ambition was in the air. In 1937, from more than 1,500 hopefuls, he became one of only 70 selected for naval flight training, a fierce competition that pushed even the toughest recruits to their limits. Remarkably, of that group, only about 25 men completed the course. Sokai finished at the very top of his class, earning a silver watch presented by Emperor Hirohito himself for his achievement. Once in the air, his skill became clear. Sokai flew combat missions in the Second Sino-Japanese War, mastering first the Mitsubishi A-5M and later the legendary Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighter. His sharp instincts, steady nerves, and fearless flying quickly earned him respect among his peers and superiors. By the time the Pacific War erupted in 1941, Sokai was already a seasoned pilot. He had flown in the attack on the Philippines and scored his first victories against enemy aircraft. His reputation was growing as one of Japan's most promising young aces. The rising prestige set the stage for his fateful mission over Guadalcanal, where everything he learned would be tested, and nearly cost him his life. On August 7, 1942, during the heights of the Second World War, Japanese were shocked at how Sokai seemed to crawl out of hell. But before we dive into that fateful mission, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Subscribe to keep up with the latest news about military history. The morning of August 7, 1942. On the early morning of August 7, 1942, the Pacific War reached a turning point. American Marines had just landed on Guadalcanal and nearby Tulagi, seizing an unfinished airfield that the Japanese were racing to complete. This bold move marked the start of the Guadalcanal campaign, forcing the Imperial Japanese Navy to respond quickly to the new threat from the major Japanese base at Rabaul in New Britain. Pilots scrambled into action. Among them was Saburo Sokai, already recognized as one of Japan's top fighter aces, flying the nimble Mitsubishi A-6M0 with the elite Tainan Kokutai Air Group. His squadron had only recently arrived in the region, shifted from New Guinea to Rabaul to meet the intensifying fight for control of the Solomons. That morning, Japanese flyers received orders to climb into the skies and intercept American forces supporting the landings on Guadalcanal. The mission was urgent, to disrupt the U.S. hold on the island before it could be reinforced. Wild energy buzzed on the airfield as Zero fighters roared into the dawn, their engines echoing across the volcanic landscape. Sokai and his wingmen climbed through the brightening sky, hearts pounding with anticipation of their first major confrontation with U.S. carrier and marine aircraft. The Imperial pilots were eager but also uneasy. They knew this battle would be different. For the first time in the Pacific, they didn't only face the American fighters but also coordinated air power backed by fresh U.S. Marine and Navy units. This fight over Guadalcanal could shape the future of the war in the South Pacific, but they made a mistake that almost cost them the mission. Mistaken the enemy fighters. As the battle over Guadalcanal heated up on August 7, 1942, Saburo Sokai was riding high on a wave of confidence. The veteran ace had already scored victories that morning and was scanning the sky for more enemy planes. High above the island, he spotted a group of aircraft below him and assumed they were U.S. fighter planes, the nimble wildcats that he had been eager to face. With his heart pounding and sights set, Sokai dived in from behind and below, closing the distance rapidly as he prepared to unleash his Zero's deadly life. In his mind, this was another chance to prove his skill against America's best. But at just about 100 yards, the truth hit him like a punch. They were not fighters at all, but they were actually Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers. These were slower, heavier planes with deadly defensive guns manned by rear gunners ready to retaliate. The mistake was almost instant and almost fatal. Unlike fighters, these bombers carried .30 caliber machine guns in the rear cockpit, designed to protect them as they attacked ships below. As Sockeye Zero closed in, the gunners opened up with a hail of fire. This was a terrifying moment that stunned Sockeye and everyone around him. This should have been a clear fighter engagement, but it turned into a brutal lesson. That split-second misidentification changed the course of his life and became one of the most dramatic episodes in his career. Before he could turn around and escape, he found himself facing a hail of fire. How was he to escape from this trap? The bullet that changed everything. What Saburo Sockeye thought were enemy fighters turned out to be Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, aircraft slower than fighters but equipped with twin .30 caliber machine guns in the rear for defense. When Sockeye Zero drew close, multiple rear gunners opened fire at point-blank range, unleashing a hail of bullets directly into his cockpit. At first, it was a storm of noise and metal. The lightweight canopy of his Mitsubishi A6M0 was built for agility, not armor, and was instantly shattered under the onslaught. In an instant, his world turned into flames of glass and smoke. One of the .30 caliber rounds struck Sockeye's head, smashed the metal frame of his goggles and creased his skull. The force of the impact destroyed vision in his right eye and temporarily paralyzed the left side of his body. Blood and shattered glass fouled his sight, turning what had been a clear sky into a red blur. For a moment, everything went dark. The brutal combination of pain and shock knocked him partly unconscious, and his crippled Zero rolled inverted and began a steep descent toward the sea. The aircraft was still alive, but its pilot seemed lost. Yet then something flickered in the depths of Sockeye's training and sheer will. This was a spark of survival instinct that refused to let go. When he regained consciousness, blood streamed across the cockpit glass and blurred what little vision he had left. He could hear the whining of the engine and feel the cool rush of wind against his wounded face, but the world was a distorted blue of pain and confusion. At that moment many pilots would have surrendered to fate. But Sockeye did not. Somewhere in the storm of his industries, a fierce determination took hold. Instead of spiraling into the blue Pacific below, he fought to pull his plane out of the dive. The aftermath of those deadly bursts from the American rear gunners marked the beginning of one of the most remarkable survival stories of World War II. How did Sockeye stop himself from crashing? Sockeye could save his life with a combination of raw courage, pain, and stubborn resolve. But how did he become an enduring legend of the Pacific Air War? If you think this is exciting, don't hesitate to like and subscribe. Subscribe to our channel for interesting military history and the latest news. Regaining control after the hit that moment, Saburo Sockeye was blind in one eye, partly paralyzed and momentarily unconscious. His once sleek fighter rolled upside down and began a terrifying descent toward the sea far below. For any other pilot, this moment would have marked the end. For Sockeye, it was only the beginning of a desperate struggle to survive. Slowly, consciousness crept back. The cold wind rushing through the shattered cockpit blasted against his face, and the roar of the engine reminded him he was still alive, but barely. Blood obscured his vision and coated the instruments, and his body ached with pain. For a terrifying moment, he could not tell which way was up. The Zero, now badly wounded from the firefight, pitched and rolled as if mocking his efforts to steady it. But Sockeye's instincts as a pilot took over. With his remaining eye, he fought the controls inch by inch, fighting not just the aircraft but the disorientation that threatened to drag him into the ocean. His left side barely responded at all, and every movement required raw effort. Yet, he refused to let go of the stick. In the chaos of blood and broken glass, he managed to level the dive and pull the Zero out of its downward spiral. It hung in the air, like a wounded machine still defying gravity. Inside the cockpit, the condition of the fighter mirrored the state of its pilot. The windshield was gone, torn by gunfire, the instruments were smeared with blood and debris, and controls responded sluggishly from the violent moments. But the engine still ran. Despite the pain, Sockeye found a faint thread of control again. His grip on the situation might have been thin, but he realized that the damaged Zero was still flying and he was still alive. In that moment, everything he had ever learned came rushing back, and the Japanese were shocked when the US pilots shot him point blank, and yet he survived. It was already a miracle that Saburo Sokai was still alive, and his plane was still running, after being heavily injured and damaged by gunfire. But he was not ready to give up and let the jet crash. Once he took back control of the Zero, he began the 4-hour journey back home with one eye and half a body. How did he stay alive on this harrowing journey, the long journey home? With his right eye gone and blood constantly blurring his left, he struggled to stay awake and keep the aircraft flying. Since his plane was still airworthy, he could still make it back to his base. With only his left eye functional, he used the weak sunlight and occasional breaks in the clouds to help judge his heading. The Pacific below was a vast, hostile stretch of blue, and he knew that one slip could send him into the deep. Every moment was agony, and at times, he nodded off only to jolt awake as the Zero began to dip. To stay conscious, he slapped his face or gritted his teeth against the pain, refusing to surrender to sleep. For 4 hours and 47 minutes, he flew that damaged fighter in agonizing silence, covering about 560 nautical miles across enemy-held waters. His fuel was precious, but his strength was almost gone. Each minute felt like an eternity as he fought internal dizziness, blood loss, and the urge to let the plane fall from the sky. What kept him going wasn't just training, but sheer will and a stubborn drive to survive. This pushed him beyond the limits of what most humans could endure. At long last, familiar volcanic peaks of New Britain came into view, and he made his way into his base at Rabaul. Even then, landing was a struggle. He nearly crashed as he circled the airfield multiple times with almost no fuel left. Still, he managed to bring the wounded Zero down. Despite all his injuries, Sokai decided to make his official mission report. Only after that did he collapse from exhaustion and trauma. But at that moment, the Japanese could not believe that their ace was so resilient. How the Japanese responded to his return. When Saburo Sokai brought his shattered Zero down at Rabaul, the reaction among his fellow pilots and ground crews was a mix of shock, disbelief and profound relief. Few expected to see him alive after he had been hit so hard, yet there he was, barely conscious, climbing out of the cockpit. Ground crews rushed to his side, stunned by the sight of his condition. His Zero was a mess, riddled with holes and smeared with his blood, yet it had somehow stayed aloft long enough to reach base. Many who had thought he died cheered with deep relief and met the wounded ace with hurried shouts and frantic support. Seeing him alive after such an incredible ordeal was almost unbelievable to those who knew how severely he had been hit. Instead of heading straight to medical care, Sokai insisted on making his mission report first. Only after filing his official account of the engagement did he collapse from exhaustion and injuries. That moment showed just how seriously he took his duty. Officers and enlisted men alike were struck by his survival. In an age and military culture that valued sacrifice and bravery, Sokai's return seemed almost miraculous. His fellow pilots, many of whom had lost comrades in recent fights, found strength and encouragement in his return. At the same time, senior commanders understood that his survival was not just physical but symbolic. But it gets even more interesting. After Sokai returned alive from a bloody, close-call flight, everyone expected that he would step back from military life. They thought he would be forced to remain on the sidelines for the rest of the war. But anyone who assumed that had never met Sokai's iron will. How does a man who lost half of his body in a mission manage to fly back to base and still serve his country? Recovery and continued service. After his near-fatal wound over Guadalcanal, Saburo Sokai's path to recovery was longer and tougher than most people expected. Immediately after his miraculous return flight, he was rushed to the Yokosuka Naval Hospital in Japan, where surgeons worked under difficult wartime conditions to save his life. They removed bone fragments from his skull and repaired his wounds, much of it done without full anesthesia because of shortages, but his right eye was lost and replaced with a prosthetic, and part of his left side had been paralyzed. Sokai spent about 5 months in the hospital, enduring painful treatments and therapy to regain strength and movement. The injury changed him physically forever, but it also gave him time to reflect on his life as a pilot. Once he was discharged in early 1943, Sokai was assigned to train new fighter pilots. But as the war situation grew harsher and Japan lost many experienced flyers, Sokai repeatedly asked his commanders to let him fly combat missions again. By November 1943, his persistence paid off. He was promoted to flying warrant officer and by April 1944 was posted with the Yokosuka Air Wing at Iwo Jima, flying the Zero once more even though he still lacked full vision in one eye. Sokai adapted his tactics to cope with his physical limits, using what sight he had to engage enemy aircraft and apply his immense skill in battle, post-war life and reconciliation with foes. After the war, Saburo Sokai's life took a dramatic turn from fierce fighter ace to quiet seeker of peace. Struggling at first in Japan's shattered post-war economy, he started a small printing business and later became a Buddhist lay acolyte, vowing never again to harm a living thing, not even a mosquito. Although he was once a warrior, Sokai reflected on what he had seen and done. He traveled to the United States many times, not as an enemy, but as a visitor, and eventually a friend to some of the men he once fought. Among them was Harold Lew Jones, ironically the SBD Dauntless gunner whose fire had nearly killed him over Guadalcanal on the dramatic day of August 7, 1942. The two met and shared memories, even exchanging gifts like Sokai's bullet-holed flight helmet. In 2000, while attending a formal U.S. Navy dinner as an honored guest, Sokai suffered a fatal heart attack. Even in his final hours, he was connecting with military personnel from the nation he once fought against. This was a fitting end to a life that transformed from wartime fury to lasting peace and reconciliation. The Japanese couldn't believe it when they saw Saburo Sokai's Zero landing on their airfield, as they all thought he would have been lost to the war. What was the most shocking part of Sokai's story? Let's know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more military history and latest news.